أنت ربي ذو الجلال والإكرام يا إلهي.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الكريم وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. We're continuing in our series about Imam Nawawi's 40 Hadith, and we're finishing our Hadith. Again, we're not going in order, but we're going to finish all of the Hadith. But we're finishing the Hadith today that speak about Islam in a broad, general sense. Not too much talking about Iman, not too much talking about character. We're simply talking about the broad kind of circle of Islam, mostly in the way in which Rasulullah ﷺ defined it in that second Hadith. And we have about 4 or 5 Hadith that we're going to talk about today, and then we're going to be finished with all of the Hadith that in a broad sense talk about Islam. And then the next time we're going to start talking about the Hadith that deal with Iman and everything that's relevant to Iman. Of course, there's overlap between all of these things. There's no right or wrong way to do this. Rasulullah ﷺ didn't mention these ahadith in any one particular order, but in this way they kind of complement each other. And last time we were talking about some of the controversial ahadith that have to deal with certain laws in Islam. And so we're going to finish that by starting with hadith number 6. If anyone's following along, hadith number 6 is a hadith in which Rasulullah ﷺ says, can everyone hear me okay? He says, أُمِرْتُ أَنْ أُقَاتِلَ النَّاسِ حَتَّى يَشْهَدُوا أَنْ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا اللَّهِ وَأَنَّ مُحَمَّدًا رَسُولُ اللَّهِ. I was commanded to fight people until they bear witness that there is no God but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that I am the messenger of Allah. Now, of course, you can see how something like this would be controversial, especially in the context of discussions about what is jihad, right? And how is Islam compatible with American democracy? This is what Muslims have been commanded to do, right? But again, this is the Prophet Muhammad now speaking, and he's speaking when? In Mecca or Medina? When is he saying this hadith? What do you think?
Medina.
Why Medina? Why would you say Medina?
There was a struggle or...
Okay, good. That's going to be very relevant, right? Muslims actually had the ability to fight when they were in Medina, right? Not when they were in Mecca. Right? This verse was revealed in Medina. Udhin means Allah has granted permission to the Muslims to fight in that they have been oppressed, right? That was revealed in Medina. They weren't even given permission to fight before that. Rasulullah ﷺ is saying this hadith as a person of Medina, not as a person of Mecca, right? This is going to be important. أُمِرْتُ أَنْ أُقَاتِلَ النَّاسِ حَتَّى يَشْهَدُوا أَنْ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا اللَّهِ وَأَنَّ مُحَمَّدًا رَسُولُ اللَّهِ. I was commanded to fight people until they bear witness that there is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is the messenger of Allah. وَيُقِيمُ الصَّلَاةِ وَيُؤْتُ الزَّكَاةِ. And they establish prayer, and they give charity. Right? Those 4 things. What are the 4 things? Bear witness that there is no God but Allah, Tawheed, Muhammad is his messenger, Nubuwah, right? Establish prayer, give charity. فَإِذَا فَعَلُوا ذَلِكَ. If they do that, right? عَصَمُوا مِنِّي دِمَاءَهُمْ وَأَمْوَالَهُم. Their wealth and their blood is safe from me, i.e. I'm not going to fight them, and I'm not going to go to war with them. Okay? Those 4 things only, right? إِلَّا بِحَقِّ الْإِسْلَامِ. Unless they do something openly in which Islam says that they have to be punished for. وَحِسَابُهُمْ عَلَى اللَّهِ تَعَالَى. But their hisab is with Allah. Right? Their hisab is ultimately with Allah, right? وَحِسَابُهُمْ عَلَى اللَّهِ تَعَالَى. And so Rasulullah ﷺ says this, right? And so let's look at the hadith in a little bit more detail, word for word. But first let's talk about the idea of jihad, right? Because this is, it's intrinsically linked to what we were talking about last week, and it's something that we always have a discussion about as Muslims, either at work, or with friends or colleagues, or even with other Muslims, right? How do we understand the concept of jihad? Well, first let's understand it linguistically. Jihad is a term. Was this a term that the Arabs used before Islam or not? Yes, it was a term they used even before Islam, right? So all it means is juhd. It comes from the idea of juhd, which is to expend energy. Okay, so that is the root, the masdar of jahada, right, is mujahada, but also juhad. Juhad is just to expend energy, like to put energy into something, right? They used that term in general before Islam. Now, there never was a term of holy war in Islam or even in the Arabic language. This term doesn't even exist. Holy war, if you're going to translate that in the Arabic language, it will be Harb al-Muqaddas. Harb al-Muqaddas. Have you ever heard of that term? Have you ever heard of it? So you are Muslims, you've been practicing Islam for years and years, and you're telling me you never even heard the term holy war. Okay? So when people are talking about holy war, okay, that should be a foreign concept to you. There's nothing, ultimately, war is not something that's loved by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or by people, right? Right? And so, Ali, radiallahu anhu, when he had his son Hussein, he wanted to, you know what he wanted to name him? Harb, yeah, war. He was a warrior. Ali was a warrior, right? And so he had his son Hussein, and he was going to name him War. And he came to Rasulullah sallallahu and said, and Rasulullah said, this is now his grandson, right? And he says, what did you name him? He said, Harb, war. And the Prophet Muhammad says, no. His name is Hussein. His name is Hassan, sorry, his name is Hassan. Hassan, which means goodness, right? So he changed his name from war to goodness, which Rasulullah says doesn't like war either, okay? And then a little while later, he had his next son. And he comes to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu and the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu says, what did you name him? He says, war. Harb. He's a warrior. You know, he's a father and he has a son. He wants his son also to be a warrior. And the name has an effect on you, by the way. Right? It has an effect on you. And Hussein was a warrior, and there was no warrior like Hussein in his time. There was no one like Hussein. But you know what the Prophet said in that moment? He said, no, his name is Hussein. Hussein means small goodness. Because Hussein was smaller than Hassan, right? So Rasulullah made his name small goodness. There's no anything in the Arabic language or in Islam after the time of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ that praises the idea of war. Now there was before Islam, like one particular version of poetry that the Arabs had was war poetry, right? So they had different types of poetry, and the poetry is what they took pride in, right? And one particular type of poetry that they had was fakhar, like pride, and a lot of that had to do with how people engaged themselves in war. But Islam did away with all that. Islam showed that there's no pride or dignity in that, right? There's only what you struggle for the sake of Allah, and anything else is just to show off. So the concept itself, there's no concept of holy war in Islam. And jihad itself, right, is a couple things to understand about the term. It's very broad, it's very general, and it's very contextual and relative, okay? Allah says in Surah Furqan, وَجَاهِدُهُمْ جِهَادًا كَبِيرًا, right? Engage in the jihad that is the jihadul akbar against the disbelievers. He says this in Surah Furqan. Now, was Surah Furqan revealed in Medina or Mecca? Anyone know? It was revealed in Mecca. Were the Muslims even fighting in Mecca? No. So what does it mean when Allah tells the Prophet Muhammad and the Muslims to engage in jihad against the polytheists, yet none of them were even engaged in war at the time, right? That was a jihad of patience. That was a jihad of perseverance. That was a jihad of steadfastness, right? And that is the only jihad that is used with the term kabir or akbar, greater, right? And this is why in another hadith the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ tells his companions who've actually come back from war, that you've come back from the lesser jihad now to the greater jihad, which is the jihad against your nafs. So in the first sense to understand, jihad, juhud, mujahada, all of this simply means struggle. In the context of doing something for the sake of Allah, it's a holy struggle. It could be against your ego, it could be against your your nafs, it could be against your desires. Everyone's jihad is different from everyone else's. It could also be in the context of war. Don't shy away from this. It could also be in the context of war, okay? in the right scenario. And this is now where we can start to talk about this hadith and understand this hadith. Because to understand this hadith, you have to understand how the world worked at the time of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You see, right now, let me ask you a question. Do you assume, even though you haven't heard of it, like let's talk about some Guatemala, okay? You're not thinking about Guatemala every day, right? Are we at war with Guatemala? How do you know? It's just your assumption, right? It's your default assumption that we're not at war. What about Brazil? Okay? What about, some remote island off of Taiwan? Are we at war with them? You haven't heard that we're not at war, right? It's just your assumption. That's your assumption. Your default assumption today in 2019, right? With every other country in the world that has borders and it has kind of like sovereignty, your default assumption is not war, it's peace, right? That's what you assume, okay? But guess what? At the time of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the world didn't work like that. The default assumption was not peace. The default assumption was war, unless a peace treaty was announced. But if no one announced the peace treaty, Persia simply assumed it was at war with Byzantium. Byzantium simply assumed it was at war with rivaling fractions in Africa and Persia and whatnot. People assumed a state of war, right? That was the default assumption. This is what's really hard for people to understand. Nowadays, the assumption is totally different, okay? So when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, I have been commanded to fight people, that is in the context of an assumption that people are fighting him, okay? That is in that context of assumption. Because the Quran says, وَإِن جَنَحُوا لِلسَّلْمِ فَجَنَحْ لَهَا وَتَوَكَّلْ عَلَى اللَّهِ. If they incline towards peace, which is the exception at that time, you also incline towards peace. And then you know what Allah says? And trust in Allah. Why would He say that? Because it wasn't the norm. It wasn't the norm to assume peace, right? So Allah says, trust in Allah. Trust in Allah that peace will go through, because that wasn't the norm, okay? So the assumptions are very different. And this is why, if you read classical texts that were written 1,000 years ago, they're always talking about Darul Harb and Darul Islam. Anyone heard of these terms before? Darul Harb and Darul Islam, okay? They would talk about the lands of fighting and the lands of Islam. That's how they would see the world, okay? The lands of Islam is where the Muslims were the majority. So the same way, and these are not terms that the Quran uses either, right? And so today, even if you look at classical definitions, Abu Hanifa, right, who's one of the major Imams, you know what his definition of a Darul Islam was? A land of Islam. His definition of a land of Islam is كل مكان تشعر فيه الأمن والأمان. Every place that you feel safety and security, you can consider a land of Islam. Now let me ask you a question. Anyone here been to the Middle East? Anyone here been to some Muslim countries, right? Syria, Egypt. I've been to Turkey, Syria, Egypt, Iran. You've been to a lot of them. Where do you feel more safety and security? Right? I mean, I didn't feel very safe and secure when I was studying Islam in Syria. I had mukhabarat come visit me multiple times, Egypt, you see police everywhere, people getting rounded up left and right for no good reason, right? I had teachers who were rounded up and just thrown in jail for no good reason, just because they have a long beard. There's no safety and security there. According to Abu Hanifa's definition, a land of Islam is where you feel safety and security, so you can do what? So you can practice the rites and rituals of Islam safely and securely. And if you can't do that, you have to make migration. I mean, you could make the argument that you got to migrate from some of those countries to a place like here, right? And that's more incumbent than the opposite, right? When Rasulullah ﷺ is saying this, you have to see it in that context. right? That back then the world was antagonistic or friendly to Muslims, right? And if you were antagonistic, it was war or nothing else. But nowadays, the assumption is flipped, right? Dr. Sherman Jackson has a really good article on this that's on the web that you can see it, Jihad in the Modern World, right? And he talks about the flip assumptions, right? And how you have to understand these texts within the context of a completely flipped geographical, societal, temporocentric assumption, right? Of what it's like just to live in the world nowadays, okay? So the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ says, Umirtu. So there's some commentary about this. Some ulama, they say, he's saying, I was commanded, okay? Not that you're commanded, but that this is something specific to the Prophet Muhammad. And when he says, Umirtu an nuqatil an-nas, nas is general, and general means people, but the majority of scholars have said this is referring to polytheists, specifically the polytheists of Arabia. Simply because this was now going to be the home of Mecca and Medina, it was going to be the home of the Haram, and this was a land that was supposed to be free from polytheism. And so this was in reference only to the land surrounding Mecca and Medina, not Muslims all over the world, right? And also something else that's very important about the hadith, look at how the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he's not saying, I was commanded to fight them until they, and then goes into detail about what they're supposed to be doing as Muslims and how they're supposed to be doing this and that. Just the bare minimum. Again, we talked about in the previous classes how Islam is only concerned, right, in a broad sense with the bare minimum. When it comes to yourself, you can apply the maximum. But when it comes to others, it's only the bare minimum. So he says, witnessing that there's no God but Allah, I'm the Prophet, prayer, charity, that's it, right? Everything else is between them and God, right? But the bare minimum, that which is open to the public, right? That's the only thing that he's looking for, okay? So it's important to understand jihad in this context. People often talk about the verse of the sword. You heard of this, right? Surah Tawbah, the verse of the sword, right? فَإِذَا انْسَلَخَ الْأَشْهُرُ الْحُرُمُ what? فَقْتُلُوا الْمُشْرِكِينَ حَيْثُ وَجَدْتُمُوهُم وَخُذُوهُم وَاحْصُرُوهُم وَقْعُدُوا لَهُمْ كُلَّ مَرْصَدٍ, right? When the sacred months have passed, right? Fight the polytheists wherever you see them, wherever you find them. Wait for them, lie in ambush for them, right? Again, this verse is within the context of that society that assumed war. The assumption was so strong. Allah says in the Quran that there's 12 months in the year. إِنَّ عِدَّةَ الشُّهُورِ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ 12 شَهْرًا فِي كِتَابِ اللَّهِ يَوْمَ خَلَقَ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضَ مِنْهَا أَرْبَعَةٌ حُرُمٌ. There's 12 months in the year. Allah decreed that when He created the heavens and the earth. 4 of them are sacred. This is something that existed before Islam, and Allah confirmed after Islam. What is the deal with this? 4 of them being sacred. The deal with this is this. Fighting at that time between Byzantium, between Persia, between various tribes in Mecca and Medina, between the Aus, between the Khazraj, between all the different clans of Quraysh, it was so prevalent. People couldn't live. That's how prevalent war was. They said, we're not going to be able to live like this. Unless we all agree that we're just going to take a break for 4 months every year. We're going to take a break from fighting. That way we can travel and make Hajj, and we can travel and do business. Okay, so that's why Dhul Qa'dah, Dhul Hijjah, Muharram, and Rajab, these 4 months, that's what they were for. The fighting was so prevalent, everyone just said, okay, let's just all agree, we're going to take a break, we're going to stop fighting, so we can go to Hajj these 4 months, and we can they used to go to Syria and Yemen and trade and then come back. Otherwise, no one would be able to live, because everyone was fighting and going to war. In this context, if the Muslims did not fight, they would have been killed. And so, this is essentially defensive jihad. It's important to understand that. And defensive jihad still exists today, right? And that's no one disputes that, right? But offensive jihad, this idea that you would offensively just go wage war with every human being just to spread Islam, this never worked. There was a group of people who tried this. You know who tried this? You know who actually tried this? The Umayyads tried this. The Umayyads, And this is why Khalid Blankenship wrote his book, Jihad in the Failed State of the Umayyads, okay? They actually had a policy in which they discouraged people from converting to Islam. They discouraged. The Umayyad, this is well known in historical books, the Umayyads discouraged people from converting to Islam because they gained more tax money from that. They gained more from the tax money of the Dhimmiyya than they did from the zakat of the Muslims. And they simply wanted to spread Islam by fighting and just saying, we're going to fight you because you're not Muslim, right? And they got too big, too fast, and the state failed. And the Abbasids, when they took over, they didn't continue that, right? They didn't continue that model. So that model actually failed. And the majority of the spread of Islam throughout history was not actually through war, it was through trade, right? And this is well documented as well. So it's important to understand these historical facts about just the idea of jihad, the contextual assumptions in which you have to read these verses, right? In which you have to read these ahadith, right? And understand the society that we live in now. Those assumptions are not the same. If the assumptions ever return, the application of the verse returns. But the assumptions are totally different now, right? So that's it for this hadith. Let me stop here because I know people got something to say. I know people have something to say. And I may not have the answer. I don't know. I'm just sharing this hadith with you. Right? I don't claim to be a historical scholar.
So you mentioned that it was by default assumed that, everyone was at war.
Right. Unless someone announced peace.
Unless someone announced peace.
Right.
So, can you elaborate more on that? I don't completely understand that. Let's say with China and Arabia, it was just assumed that they were at war.
No, they didn't. I mean, it was too far away.
Okay.
Yeah. If you're, they're not, there's no planes, there's no cars. Like, at some point, geographical barriers just make you irrelevant, right? At that time, okay? So, but some people like Genghis Khan, who just ventured out, he just assumed a state of war, right? He didn't feel it necessary when he attacked Muslim countries. He didn't feel it necessary to first send out an announcement that we would like to announce war on you, No, that was the assumption, right? And no one was confused about the Tatars. They would refer to them as the Tatars. No one was confused why they wanted to fight. They were just confused about where to go, how to fight. They were afraid, And so the assumptions back then were that if someone got close enough to you and they were big enough, okay, they were a threat. And if you didn't fight them, they were going to fight you. The reason that Persia, who was on one side of Arabia as the predominant superpower, and Byzantium, who was on the other side of Arabia as the other predominant superpower in that region, the reason neither one of them ever bothered going into Arabia and fighting wasn't because of anything other than it wasn't worth it. Worthless sand, not worth it people. That's how they viewed them, right? And when Rasulullah ﷺ sent a letter to Cyrus, the Persian king, inviting him to Islam with a messenger saying, Aslam Taslam, if you submit, you'll be safe, right? The Persian king took one look at him and laughed, took his letter and ripped it up. You're not even worth it. That's what he was. That's what he thought. They had puppet states in Yemen. Persians did, right? But they didn't bother fighting the Yemenis, right? This is why you see Persian artifacts in Yemen even today, because they had puppet kings in Yemen. But in Arabia, they didn't even bother. Yemen had a long civilization, and it was somewhat worth it. But Arabia wasn't even worth it, right? And so the king takes his letter and says, "You're not even worth it." Rips it up. The man goes back to Rasulullah ﷺ and tells him what happened. And he tells him, he took one look at me, he took your letter and he ripped it up. And the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ says, مَزَّقَ اللَّهُ مُلْكَهُ كَمَا مَزَّقَ رِسَالَتِي. May Allah rip up his kingdom just like he ripped up my letter. And his kingdom was over within days. And someone else had replaced him, right? And then when Umar took over, the Muslims took over Persia. So again, just the historical context is very, very important to understand. The default assumptions that people lived with was totally different back then than it is now. Offensive sounding statements, like the ones in the quote-unquote verse of the sword, okay? Don't even call it that. Don't call it the verse of the sword. You know, it's just an ayah, it's just Allah's verse, okay? The default assumption is that if you don't fight, they're gonna fight you. That's not mentioned because it was understood. And there's no redundancy in the Quran. To say something that's already understood would be redundant. And one of the principles of the Quran is that it does not contain redundancy. So you have to know what the assumptions are, okay? Any other points or questions about that? Okay, so the next hadith we're going to talk about is a couple of hadith that talk about, you know, in general, just rights and laws. And so one of the hadith this is hadith number 33. Again, some of these are just kind of miscellaneous things. The last hadith we're going to talk about is something that just kind of comprehensively talks about Islam in the community sense. But some of these are just miscellaneous that we have to wrap up. And one of them has to do with, as a community, what do you do as Muslims when there are accusations of people against one another, right? And so Rasulullah says, لو يعطى الناس بدعواهم لأدعى رجال أموال الناس ودماءهم أموال قوم ودماءهم ولكن البينة على المدعي واليمين على من أنكر. What does this mean? Rasulullah says, if people were given, okay, if they were given everything that they simply claimed, all right, act has to happen. Not just kissing or hugging, but actual penetration. You have to actually see that, right? And so people aren't even looking for that, right? And they're even, a lot of times they're going to turn away from that. It's almost impossible to find 4 witnesses to actually prove that, which is why the punishment of that is so severe. It is meant to be a deterrent more than an actual application, right? And so al-bayyinatu, if you come with an accusation and you don't come with proof, you're almost considered a liar, right? What that is meant to do is it's meant to decrease the amount of hatred and distrust in society. People simply accusing one another of everything. The burden of proof has to be really, really high. It has to be really, really high, right? That is in the case of sexual immorality. In the case of financial transactions. In the case of personal wealth, it's 2 witnesses. And this is what the majority of madahib say, okay? Not 4, but 2. 2 witnesses. Because this actually happens a lot more common, okay? And it's much more likely to happen that someone would just steal something from someone else. Or someone would disagree about a particular contractual matter, right? And so in these situations, Rasulullah says, when someone comes to him with a financial dispute, he tells him, Shahadadaka aw yaminuhu. Your 2 witnesses or his yameen. In other words, his refutal, and we'll talk about what that. So what does yameen mean? Okay, what does it mean when someone's accused and they have to refuse that accusation or say that they're innocent? You don't just say that you're innocent. What he says in this hadith is that you swear by Allah that you're innocent. And if this actually happens in a court of law, in an Islamic court, the judge is supposed to remind that person and tell that person, do you swear, like the person who's accused, do you truly swear by Allah? And he reminds them of the names of Allah, that he's, Allah, the king, the sovereign, the most merciful, the powerful, the all-knowing, the all-seeing. Do you swear by him that you did not do this? And that person then swears by Allah. He's not allowed to swear by anything else. And by the way, this is an aqidah point. You are not allowed to swear by anything other than Allah, period, as a Muslim. Allah is allowed to swear by things in this life. And He does that in the Quran. And those things are called mu'addam shara'an. They are raised in elevation and importance. Like Allah swears by the pen. Noon wal qalami wa ma yasturun. Allah swears by the sun, right? Was shamsi, right? And He swears by the moon. Wal qamari idha talaha, right? And He swears by a lot of different things, right? He swears by things that we see of His creation and in nature. Allah is allowed to do that. We're not allowed to swear by those things. The only thing we're allowed to swear by is Allah. And in the books of fiqh, it actually says, if someone in a Muslim society is accused and they're not a Muslim, they're a Christian, okay? The judge is supposed to get them to swear by God in a way that is in accordance with Islamic belief, but also in accordance with the Christian's belief. Like what? Like how? The judge would then ask him, do you swear by God, the one who revealed the Injil to Jesus? And the Christian would say yes. Because that's how they believe God in that way, right? And we believe God in that way. Or if they're a Jew, say, do you swear by Allah? If the Jew is the one who's being accused, do you swear by God, the one who revealed the Torah to Moses? Right? And the judge is supposed to get them to swear by God that they did not do this thing, or that they're innocent. Or even if they're a polytheist, do you swear by God? Do you swear by Allah, the one who created you and fashioned you? Because even polytheists at the time of the Prophet Muhammad believed that. They believed that Allah is the one who created everything. They just believed in intermediaries, right? And so that's an important point. It's an important point because even in the books of fiqh, there's some leeway of connecting with people in a metaphysical sense, in a way that we both agree with, right? Even if they're not a Muslim, and they swear by God that they didn't do that thing, right? Unless two witnesses are brought, and there are a lot of different, commentaries about the judge and how the judge is supposed to act in these situations. There's a lot of etiquettes of being a judge in Islam, right? And you don't judge according to your desires. You don't judge according to your own opinions. Even if you know something about the person, you judge according to what is obvious in the evidence, not what you know about them. When God revealed to David, Dawood in the Quran, when he was a king and he became a judge, is Ya Dawood, inna ja'alnaka khalifatan linnas, fahkum bayna nasi bil haqq, wa la tattabi'il hawa fayudillaka an sabilillah. We have made you a vicegerent, a representative, right? Judge between people in truth and don't follow your desires, right? Don't follow your desires because you will mislead. That will cause you to be misled and you will mislead people as a result. And so Rasulullah ﷺ says there's one judge in paradise and two judges that are in hell. The one judge that is in paradise is the one who did his best and used the objective evidence to judge. But the one who judged according to ignorance, didn't know what he was talking about, even if he's right, that person has a place in hellfire because he was ignorant of the laws and what was actually going on. Or the one who withheld knowledge that was actually supposed to be applied. People who take bribes, people who are influenced in this way or that way. All of these things, there's a long discussion about them in the books of fiqh. But again, in a broad sense, in the way laws are broadly applied, this is a broad kind of general statement of how Islam articulates the idea of innocent, right, until proven guilty, right? The one who accuses, it's upon that person to bring proof. It's upon that person to bring evidence. In a lot of cases, is bringing sufficient witnesses. Now, nowadays, can DNA evidence replace something? Or there's a lot of kalam about that. There's a lot of, discussion about that. We don't have time for that. But what's important to understand is the general principle, right? Of innocent until proven guilty in this particular way of saying it. Any comments about this? Any statements or comments or anything? The third hadith we want to talk about is hadith about responsibilities before Allah as a Muslim. And what actually lifts your responsibilities before Allah as a Muslim. And Rasulullah ﷺ says in a hadith, إِنَّ اللَّهَ تَجَاوَزَ لِي عَنْ أُمَّتِي الْخَطَأَ وَالنِّسْيَانَ وَمَا اسْتُكْرِهُ عَلَيْهِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has overlooked or has forgiven, okay, for me, my community, three things. When they make mistakes, when they forget, and whenever they're forced to do something. These three things. When they make mistakes, when they forget, or they're forced to do something. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there's a story that is attached to this hadith. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reveals in the Quran, لِلَّهِ مُلْكُ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala owns the kingship of the heavens and the earth, right? And he says, وَإِن تُبْدُوا مَا فِي أَنفُسِكُمْ أَوْ تُخْفُوهُ يُحَاسِبْكُم بِهِ اللَّهُ فَيَغْفِرُ لِمَن يَشَاءُ وَيُعَذِّبُ لِمَن يَشَاءُ وَاللَّهُ عَلَى كُلِّ شَيْءٍ قَدِيرٌ. If you, Allah says this in the Quran, if you reveal what is within yourself or you hide it, it doesn't matter. Allah is going to take you into account. The companions of the Prophet Muhammad, when they hear this verse, they go to the Prophet Muhammad and they tell him, "Oh Prophet Muhammad, we have received revelation and we can bear the revelation in what it tells us to do. Prayer, charity, belief in Allah, belief in you, we can bear that. But now this verse, we don't know if we can bear it. Because Allah says He'll take you into account what's inside of you, even if you don't let people know. I mean, how much goes on inside of us and we just hide it, right? And we don't want people to know. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reveals this, and they go to the Prophet Muhammad and they complain, right? And the Prophet Muhammad says, do you want to be like the people who before you, he's referring to Ahlul Kitab, the Bani Israel. When they heard revelation, they said, Sami'na wa asayna. We hear and we disobey. But Rasulullah says, don't be like that. Say, Sami'na wa ata'na, ghufranaka rabbana wa ilayka al-masir. Say, we hear and we obey. We ask you for forgiveness, O God, and to you is the final return. When they said this, when the Muslims heard this from the Prophet and they said this, another revelation came down, and these are the last verses of Surah Baqarah. In the last verses of Surah Baqarah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that آمَنَ الرَّسُولُ بِمَا أُنزِلَ إِلَيْهِ مِنْ رَبِّهِ وَالْمُؤْمِنُونَ. The Prophet has believed in what has come to him, and so have the believers. كُلٌّ آمَنَ بِاللَّهِ وَمَلَائِكَتِهِ وَكُتُبِهِ وَرُسُلِهِ لَا نُفَرِّقُ بَيْنَ أَحَدٍ مِنْ رُسُلِهِ. Every one of them believes in Allah, His messengers, His books, and His angels, and we don't separate between any of the messengers. وَقَالُوا سَمِعْنَا وَأَطَعْنَا غُفْرَانَكَ رَبَّنَا وَإِلَيْكَ الْمَصِيرُ. And they say, because Allah is now confirming this incident between the Sahaba and the Prophet Muhammad, they say, we have heard and we obey, and we ask you for forgiveness, O God, and to use the final return. And then God tells them, make this dua. He's telling Muslims, He's telling us, make this dua. Ask me for this. This is very important now. These are the last verses of Surah Baqarah, and it's encouraged to say this every night before you go to bed. رَبَّنَا لَا تُؤَاخِذْنَا إِن نَسِينَا أَوْ أَخْطَأْنَا. First thing that we're supposed to ask for, oh Allah, don't what? Don't take us into account if what? Nasina aw akhtana. If we forget or we make a mistake. In the books of tafsir, they talk about how in Bani Israel, in the community of Bani Israel, they were taken into account. Right? The children of Israel, they were taken into account. If they forgot or if they made a mistake in their rites and rituals. If they simply made a mistake or if they forgot, they weren't forgiven for it. They were taken into account for that, right? And so this is a mercy now from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the community of Muhammad, that this is different. We are not taken into account for mistakes that we make, and we're not taken into account for things that we forget. And we'll talk about details here in a second, right? And this is a dua that we're supposed to make every night before we go to bed. رَبَّنَا لَا تُؤَاخِذْنَا إِن نَسِينَا أَوْ أَخْطَأْنَا رَبَّنَا وَلَا تَحْمِلْ عَلَيْنَا إِصْرًا كَمَا حَمَلْتَهُ عَلَى الَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِنَا. Oh Allah, oh God, do not put upon us an isr. Isr in the Arabic language is something that is weighty, heavy. It could be metaphysically heavy, like metaphorically heavy, like you feel the burden of mountains are on your shoulders, right? Or it could be actually heavy. And this is something that the Bani Israel were taxed with. وَإِذْ نَقَلَ الْجَبَلَ فَوْقَهُمْ كَأَنَّهُ ذُلَّةٌ. Allah actually raised to show the Bani Israel the importance of the covenant that they were given. He raised the mountain of Tur. This is what's revealed in the Quran. He raised it above them, put it right over their heads as if they were about to be crushed by it, to show them the burden of this covenant, right? And they were given so many laws in their covenant, right? And it was a burden for them. Part of it was a punishment because of all of the times they reneged on their promise with Allah. And so one of the things we're supposed to ask for, because we're a continuation and a completion of the best community for God. One of the things we're supposed to ask for is لا تحمل علينا, do not bear us with a burden, a weighty burden. Think of that mountain over their shoulder. Think of the mountain of Tur over the shoulders of Bani Israel. When Musa was given the commandments, right? This is when that happened. It's mentioned in the Quran in a couple places. Right? These rules, they apply broadly to other things. A couple things that are important exceptions, like dhabiha, okay? Like when you're slaughtering, if you forget to say the name of Allah, okay? At the moment of slaughtering, if you're slaughtering, you forget to say the name of Allah. Is that animal permissible or no? Because Allah says in the Quran, وَلَا تَأْكُلُوا مِمَّا لَمْ يُذْكَرِ اسْمُ اللَّهِ عَلَيْهِ. Don't eat from that which the name of Allah was not mentioned. إِنَّهُ فِسْقٌ. It is corruption, right? So what about that poor little goat you just killed, right? You just took its life, but you forgot to say, dang it, forgot to say Bismillah. What happens in that case?
Actions are by intentions?
Yeah, that's true. Actions are by intentions. There are narrations, and the Shafi'is and the Hanafis use this as well, in which Rasulullah ﷺ says that Bismillah is always on the lip of the Muslim. This is an authentic hadith, right? And in the case of unintentional forgetfulness, right? In that case, it's still zabiha, because it was killed the right way, right? And this poor animal's life was taken, and you can't just throw that away simply because you forgot, okay? So in this case, this hadith applies, right? It's still considered zabiha. Now, if in the case of hunting, though, it's different, right? And all of the ulama are agreed about this. Now, probably not very many hunters here. I tried going hunting one time, totally failed. Did everything wrong. Stood up in a tree for hours, didn't do anything right. Later found out, and it didn't work out. But if anyone here is a hunter, then in that case, you have to say Bismillah at the moment of releasing your arrow, or at the moment of releasing your dog to catch that prey, right? And if you forget to say Bismillah in that moment, it's not halal. Why is there a difference? The ulama, they say, because in the case of zabiha, you're doing everything according to the protocol, and that carries with it the essence of Bismillah. And you're killing it the right way, right? And the blood is being drained. And there's all these etiquettes to the actual dhabh, sharpening your sword, cutting the jugular vein, and the internal carotid artery, and the portion of the trachea, all these things that make it zabiha. You're doing all of that, and it kind of accounts for forgetting Bismillah. But oftentimes when you're hunting, the animal dies not according to this, but from an arrow or something else, and that's allowed simply because of the nature of hunting. But in that case, you really need a Bismillah. And forgetting to say Bismillah in that situation is not like forgetting to say it in the situation of actual slaughter. And the ulama are all agreed about this. So probably not relevant to anyone here, but interesting to know, right? It's interesting to know how ulama think, even if it's not something that you do. It's interesting to know how ulama think. In the case of compulsion, if someone is compelling you to say something that is against Islam, they literally have a gun to your head, right? Or they have some kind of compulsion that puts your life or someone else's life at risk. It's important in that moment to understand that you're allowed to say what you need to say to spare your life. But first, you should come with what the books of fiqh talk about, mu'arada, right? You should use mu'arada. What are mu'aradat? Mu'aradat are statements that make the person think that you're saying what they want you to say, but you're actually saying something else, right? It's a type of deception. So, for example, someone says, I want you to confirm that there is no God, period. I want you to say that. He puts a gun to your head, right? And you might say something like, you want me to confirm that there's no God? Okay, I believe in this. And what you're doing is you're pointing to a necklace that says tawakkul, that's under your shirt or something like that. That I believe in this, right? That's called mu'arada, right? You do whatever you can to get out of that open disbelief, right? Now, if they force you to really do something that's just clearly disbelief, still you're allowed to do that if your life is in danger, while believing sincerely and firmly deep down in your heart that you're only saying this to get out of being killed or losing a limb or something to that effect, what is called a darurat, because darurat tubih al-mahdurat, things that are necessities make permissible impermissibilities, and the preservation of life is a necessity in Islam. It's one of 5 important necessities: the preservation of life, preservation of health, intellect, family, wealth, even some people say dignity. Ad-darurat tubih al-mahdurat, right? Necessities make permissible impermissibilities. In that sense, you're allowed to say a statement of disbelief, right? Afterwards, when you're in a place of safety, you should make tawbah and renew your Iman. Renew your Iman. Just like if someone forced you to eat pork, what would you do afterwards? You'd probably go wash your mouth out, right? And if someone were, now, alhamdulillah, we're not in that situation, but it's just important to know these things. If someone, la samhallah, was in that situation, afterwards, the first chance that you get, you go renew your Iman. What if you forgot salah? Right? What if you forgot salah? If you forget salah, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, the moment you remember, you make it up. And if you do that, you're not accountable. If you actually forgot, like if you overslept, anything that happens while you're sleeping, rufi'a al-qalamu ala al-na'im. This is what the text says. Anything that you do while you're, even if you sleepwalk and do something weird, okay? If you're actually sleepwalk, you're not responsible. You're not responsible for anything that you do, right? Or if you're sleeping and you have a bad dream, you're not responsible for that, right? Because you don't have your conscience with you, okay? But if you oversleep for salah, for example, you can't wake up and say, man, I overslept. Might as well just sleep another 2 hours since I have to make it up anyway. In that case, now it is a sin. Because what the hadith says is لا كفارة لها إلا ذلك. There's nothing that will wipe out that mistake other than making it up the minute you remember. The minute you remember. Okay? If you do anything to delay it, the minute you remember, then it's as if you delayed it as salat was in its time and it went out while you knew it. Okay? So you have to make it up the minute you remember. Or at least make some kind of effort to be working towards that. Okay? That's important. There's also this idea of you could potentially be in the time of salah, okay? And the time for salah comes, and you have a chance to pray, but then what do? You're like, I'll just pray later. I still have 2 more hours, okay? And you had an hour and a half between Dhuhr and Asr to pray. You just went ahead and delayed it. And then the last hour, when you wanted to pray, you forgot. You totally forgot. Now in this case, you're not completely removed of the burden. Because you had a chance to pray, and you delayed it, okay? So in this case, it's like a partial absolution of the responsibility, but not fully, right? Because if you delay while you had the chance to do something, and then you forgot, you're still considered partly responsible, okay? Or at least in some sense responsible. Which is why the best thing is just don't delay your salah. Pray on time. The most beloved deed to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is praying on time. That is an authentic text. Praying on time is the most beloved deed to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yes?
What does it mean by praying on time? Like right when the time is
praying right at the beginning is the most beloved thing. The next most beloved thing, right, is praying within the time. But the more you delay, the more likely it is that something's going to happen and you're going to miss it. It's just like the second class that we had when we talked about the hadith. كَالرَّعِي يَرْعَى حَوْلَ الْحِمَى يُوشِكُ أَنْ يُوقَعَ فِيهِ. It's just like the shepherd who takes his sheep really close to that boundary of the king that it shouldn't be near. At some point, one of those sheep are going to cross over and they're going to cross that red line. And he's not going to be able to control that, right? That's that gray area that you want to stay out of. So the more you delay it, the more you enter the gray area, okay? But in general, this should be understood in the broad context of Islam, because a lot of that hadith that we've talked about was halal, haram, responsibilities, taqwa, okay? a lot of these things should be understood within this context. There's one more hadith before I talk about the last hadith. We're not going to talk much about the explanation because the hadith is self-explanatory. Something else that goes with this that's very complementary to this is, what about not doing an evil thing that you wanted to do? Okay? Are you responsible for that? Okay? And the answer is no. Not doing an evil thing, that not forgetfulness, not mistake, you just didn't get around to doing it. You didn't get around to doing that haram thing, but you wanted to do it. Okay? Are you responsible for that? And in that sense, I want to mention this hadith that's from Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhuma عن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم فيما يرويه عن ربه تبارك وتعالى قال إن الله كتب الحسنات والسيئات ثم بين فمن هم بحسنة فلم يعملها كتبها الله عنده حسنة كاملة. Whoever amongst you, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He wrote the decree for good and bad, good things and bad things, He wrote this rule, okay? Wrote this rule that whoever intends to do something good and they simply don't get around to doing it, they have one good deed. Alright? They wanted to do something good, they just didn't get around to doing it, they have one good deed. Okay? So that they're responsible for that. For that good intention, they're responsible. And a part of that responsibility is reward. Okay? And then he says, وَإِنْ هَمَّ بِهَا فَعَمِلَهَا كَتَبَهَا اللَّهُ عِنْدَهُ عَشَرَ حَسَنَاتٍ إِلَى 700 ضَعْفٍ إِلَى أَضْعَافٍ كَثِيرًا. If they get around to doing it, now depending on your intention and depending on the circumstances, the difficulty, the variables in that deed, right? The nuances, and Allah knows all those things. That's one of the names of Allah is Al-Latif. Al-Latif is the one who's aware of the smallest subtleties. If you do that good intention, and you do carry out that action, you're rewarded 10 times, up to 700 times, up to many, many, many multiples of that, depending on these variables. Okay? Depending on these variables. We'll be done soon. And then, if you get around, if you make a bad intention, وَإِنْ هَمَّ بِسَيِّئَةٍ فَلَمْ يَعْمَلْهَا كَتَبَ اللَّهُ عِنْدَهُ حَسَنَةً كَامِلَةً. If you intend something evil, alright, you want to do something bad, and then you're about to do it, but then you hold yourself back. You literally restrain yourself, okay? You have one good reward with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then وَإِنْ هَمَّ بِهَا فَعَمِلَهَا كَتَبَ اللَّهُ لَهُ سَيِّئَةً وَاحِدَةً. And if you actually do that, you have one evil deed with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if you actually had a bad intention and you never got around to doing it, nothing happens. Nothing happens. And you're not responsible for that. Okay? All of this, yeah.
So that means that you had the intention of doing it, you just didn't, even until the time that you just didn't.
It just didn't work out. Nothing happened, nothing is written. Okay? But if you held yourself back, and you intentionally didn't do it, okay, you get one good reward.
So does that include if you attempted to do it or prevented from it?
No, if you attempted, that's a sin. Yeah. This is if nothing happens. Absolutely nothing happens, right? Then nothing is written. And that is out of the mercy of Allah. Okay? So again, these two hadiths should be seen in complementing one another. If anyone is following along. Hadith number 35. لا تحاسدوا ولا تناجشوا ولا تباغضوا ولا تبادروا ولا يبيع بعضكم على بيع بعض. Don't envy one another. Don't تناجشوا is deceive. Don't deceive one another. Okay? Don't be hateful towards one another. And don't tabadaru. Dubur is your back. It's literally to turn your back. It means to shun. Like, don't shun one another. Like, you're not going to talk to anyone ever again. Okay? Don't do that with one another, right? وَلَا يَبِيعْ بَعْضُكُمْ عَلَى بَيْعِ بَعْضٍ. And don't, like, if you see someone's about to make a purchase, don't go purchase it ahead of them, or steal their purchase or like their contract, or just get it ahead of them or something like that. Don't do that with one another. He says, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, وَكُونُوا عِبَادَ اللَّهِ إِخْوَانًا. Be servants of God, brothers and sisters of one another. Be servants of God, brothers and sisters of one another. Al-Muslimu akhul Muslim. The Muslim is the brother of another Muslim or sister of another Muslim. لا يظلم. He doesn't oppress him. لا يكذب. He doesn't call him a liar. ولا يحقر. He doesn't belittle that person. Okay? التقوى ها هنا ويشير إلى صدره ثلاث مرات. The Prophet Muhammad then says, taqwa is here. And then he goes like this 3 times. He does this 3 times. 1, 2, 3. He says, taqwa is here. Right? He's saying God conscientiousness is here. So he's saying all these outward things, okay? But then he says taqwa is here. This is a good transition next week or the week after to start talking about Iman, because now he's pointing to his heart. He's saying the origin of all of this is here. Okay? You don't spy on one another, you don't hate one another, you don't deceive one another, you're not envious of one another, right? You're brothers and sisters, the servants of God, all together as a community, but the origins of all of this is here. Okay? So he points to his heart 3 times. He says, taqwa ha huna. بِحَسْبِ امْرِئٍ مِنَ الشَّرِّ أَنْ يَحْقِرَ أَخَاهُ الْمُسْلِمِ. It's enough of evil for you simply that you look down on your brother or sister. Enough evil for you, not for that person, that you look down on your Muslim brother or sister. كل مسلم على المسلم حرام دمه وماله وعرضه. Every Muslim, for another Muslim, their blood, their wealth, and their reputation and their dignity is sacred. Haram here doesn't just mean impermissible. It means sacred. Okay? Just like ihram is a sacred state that you're in when you go to Hajj. Takbirul ihram, when you say Allahu Akbar, that now creates a sacred state where you're not allowed to talk. You're not allowed to check your phone or text or do all these things, right? Well, these are sacred, okay? And so you can't violate them. So now, this is Islam. All of these other hadith we've talked about up till now, they've been on a personal level. But now this is the communal level, right? And all of these things are talked about in detail in Surah Hujurat. Surah Hujurat has kind of a context. When the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, we're going to end with this. When the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, when he came into Medina, he was given a place to stay, and people didn't understand the etiquette of community, of prophethood. A man came to him from Banu Tamim and yelled at the Prophet Muhammad while he was in his little apartment, right, to come out, because he had some poetry that he wanted the Prophet to hear, right? But the etiquette was so bad, right? He's yelling out at the Prophet Muhammad, "Hey Muhammad, come on down," right? "I want to share something with you." Allah revealed Quran about this. This is what all of Surah Hujurat is about, right? Surah Hujurat is all about adab. In fact, when I was memorizing Quran, my teacher told me, you're going to memorize Surah Hujurat before you memorize anything else, because adab qabla al-ilm. You need to learn etiquette before you learn knowledge. And all of Surah Hujurat is about etiquette, right? It's about your personal life, but it's about the etiquette of community. It's about the bare minimums of Islam. And this hadith is about the rights of the community, right? Now, this is what Islam demands, the rights of the community. When we start talking about ihsan, it's a different discussion. Ihsan is about giving up your right. That's what ihsan is. Like beauty in practice, in religion, it's about giving up your rights, right? That's what ihsan is. Islam is about giving people their rights, right? Ihsan is really on a personal level about giving up your rights. Like it was your right, but you're just gonna let go. You're gonna let it go, let it go, let it go, let it go. This was the Prophet Muhammad's life for 23 years. He just let things go over and over and over again. And when we talk about the hadith about ihsan, we're gonna be hitting that theme over and over again. But this is about maintaining the rights of people, right? You have to have this first before you can do that, okay? And so, in Surah Hujurat, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about all of these things, right? إِن جَاءَكُمْ فَاسِقٌ بِنَبَإٍ. First of all, what he says is, يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا تقدموا بين يدي الله ورسوله. Oh, you who believe, don't put yourselves before Allah and His Messenger. Don't prioritize yourselves. واتقوا الله. Have taqwa. So now this is, the whole surah is about taqwa. The whole surah is about a manifestation of taqwa. إن الله سميع. يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا ترفعوا أصواتكم فوق صوت النبي. Oh, you who believe, don't raise your voices above the Prophet. There's no etiquette in that. Right? You're in a sacred situation here. Don't raise your voices above that of the Prophet. Right? إن الذين يغضون أصواتهم عند رسول الله أولئك الذين امتحن الله قلوبهم للتقوى. People who lower their voice in the presence of the Prophet, Allah has tested their hearts for taqwa. When the Prophet Muhammad says taqwa ha huna, he's showing how etiquette and mannerisms is so linked to the idea of taqwa. And Allah is saying the people who lower their voice in the presence of the Prophet, in other words, they're conscientious of this sacred relationship, those people have taqwa in their hearts. And then Allah continues to say, if someone comes to you with a rumor, make sure you clarify. Right? If two people are fighting, right, make peace between them. Right? لا يسخر قوم من قوم عسى أن يكونوا خيرا منهم. Don't let one people make fun of another people. It may be that that person's better, and don't let a group of women make fun of another group of women. It may be that they're better, right? And so bullying and pressuring and ridiculing, don't use bad nicknames for one another. وَلَا تَجَسَّسُوا وَلَا يَغْتَبْ بَعْضُكُمْ بَعْضًا. Don't spy on one another. Don't backbite one another. Right? أَيُحِبُّ أَحَدُكُمْ أَن يَأْكُلَ لَحْمَ أَخِيهِ مَيْتًا فَكَرِهْتُمُوهُ. Would any of you like to eat the dead flesh of your brother? Get to know one another. يا أيها الناس إنا خلقناكم من ذكر وأنثى وجعلناكم and we made you into nations and tribes. Oh, you who believe. Oh, people, right? We have created you from male and female, and we've made you into nations and tribes. So you can get to know one. So get to know one another, right? And finally, at the end of all of this, Allah says something very interesting. The Arabs would come to the Prophet Muhammad and say, we believe. قالت الأعراب آمنا. Okay? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says this. قُلْ لَمْ تُؤْمِنُوا وَلَكِنْ قُولُوا أَسْلَمْنَا. No, you don't believe. You don't yet have Iman. But he tells the Prophet Muhammad, tell them what you have right now is Islam. وَلَكِنْ قُولُوا أَسْلَمْنَا. But we've submitted. We have Islam. But you don't yet have Iman. All of this is the rights of Islam. Everything that Surah Hujurat has been talking about to now, what the Hadith is talking about to now, this is all what you do on the surface. Right? But Iman takes time. And so Allah says, وَلَمَّا يَدْخُلِ الْإِيمَانُ فِي قُلُوبِكُمْ. The language here is very important. Allah says, لَمَّا. Lamma in the Arabic language means it hasn't happened up to now, but it may happen in the future, i.e. not yet. Iman has not yet entered your hearts. Not yet. Okay? And that's the growth mindset that a Muslim is always supposed to have. Not yet. Not yet. You're never satisfied with where you are. You're always thinking, not yet. Not yet. And so Iman is something that comes after submission, after practice, after engaging in an effort and engaging in halal, avoiding haram, embodying the principles of taqwa, of everything that we've talked about these last couple weeks. That's when Iman starts to come into your heart. And those are the ahadith now that we're going to start talking about in the next class. All of the ahadith in Imam Nawawi's Arba'in that deal with Iman, the way the Prophet Muhammad defined it. Of course, all of these ahadith have overlap between Islam, Iman, and Ihsan. But we're just doing it this way because some of them complement others. Let me stop here. Is there any questions or comments? Anything anyone want to add, take away? Anything like that?
Question, I guess, was about Dar al-Harb versus Dar al-Islam.
Yeah.
So even if the country is majority non-Muslim, it could still be categorized as...
Well, this was Abu Hanifa's definition. Imam Malik's definition was it depends on the governance, not the people. So according to Imam Malik, what is the rule of law and who's making the rule of law? If they're Muslims, it's a Darul Islam. According to Abu Hanifa, that wasn't as important. What matters is what you feel. What do you feel? Do you feel like it's safe for you to practice all of the rites and rituals of Islam? Or do you feel like it's not safe? البلد الذي تشعر فيه الأمن والأمان. Safety and security. That's what mattered to Abu Hanifa. If you don't feel that, you're not in Darul Islam. Because to him, it wasn't the people or the governance. It was, are you able to practice? That's what matters. You know? And so Imam Malik said, no, what matters is the governance. Who's making the laws? And what are the laws? Are they secular or are they Islamic? You know? Yeah.
The hunting example is saying that you have to say Bismillah before you shoot or
Yeah.
but if you find the animal is still alive, you have to slaughter.
Yeah. Of course, that's, you know, if you find it still alive, then it's just like a regular dhabh at that moment.
So in case you do forget, then
We forget what?
so to say Bismillah before you shoot the arrow. So that
Oh,
that
okay.
animal just dies, it just goes, you can't.
Yeah, you're not allowed to, according to the ulama, you're not allowed to eat that, right? Because it wasn't, if it dies, if it's dead when you get to it, you didn't say Bismillah, it's not permissible. Because not only was it not killed, according to them, but nothing was mentioned, right? And so, that is, of course, I don't think this is going to be relevant for a lot of us, but that's an agreed upon discussion.
So you'd be punished for killing an animal though, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. I don't think, you're not intentionally killing the animal just for game. I mean, if you're going out and hunting, for like trophy hunting, that's haram mutlaqan. Like trophy hunting is impermissible, no questions asked, right? But if you were actually hunting but you simply forgot, in that case, I don't think you have the sin of killing the animal, but you don't have the benefit of the animal at that point. Yeah. So for all you archers. Okay, Zakhla. So next week I'm actually out of town, but the week after that we're going to start with Hadith number 4, inshallah.
So no class next week.
Yeah, no class.
والإكرام